everyone, and welcome to the Successful Investors Financing European and International Projects panel. My name is TEMPERTON, and it's a pleasure to be joined here today by four real sector-leading experts in the financial ecosystem who I think all have really unique and international perspectives to share today. In today's panel, we're going to be covering the current investment opportunities in Europe at the minute. We're going to be taking a look at the sort of professional investors that are actually active in the sector at the minute, and then also diving into some of the current blockers and hurdles that we need to overcome to get wider kind of adoption. I'd now like to kind of hand over to our panelists to give a brief introduction to themselves before we kick off.
So my name is MOSER. I'm around 25 years in the financial sector. I started from university as an analyst, and then I was running for 12 years funds for banks in Switzerland, Germany, and Luxembourg. And the last 15 years, I concentrated mostly on metal resources. In the last 2 years, because of lockdown, I looked for a new industry. So I looked over cryptocurrencies and cannabis. And then I found out that cryptocurrencies is a bit too complicated. And cannabis is more easy because you can, consume it, you can touch it, and then the last 2 years I spent exploring companies, investors, mostly in Europe, and that's the reason I'm here.
Fantastic, thanks, Marcus. And I'm, as mentioned, I'm a consultant at Hanway. We are Europe's leading cannabis sector advisory firm. We specialise in new market entry, corporate and investment strategy, offering licensing support to our clients and also helping them to build their brands and supply chains across Europe. This topic particularly is really relevant for us. Through First Wednesdays, we've recently published a report with Crunchbase, actually publishing first of its kind data on the investment opportunities and history in Europe. So if you'd like to dive deeper into the data and some of the interviews and case studies, you can download that at the First Wednesdays website. Alfredo.
Thank you. My name is Alfredo PASCUAL. I'm mostly known in the industry for my previous job at NJB's Daily, but now I'm working as Vice President of Investment Analysis at Seed Innovations, and we are a London AIM Stock Exchange quoted investment fund. We are probably the largest European investment fund in the sector, judging by the amount of investment to date and particularly exits that we've done.
Good day, everybody. My name is MATTHIAS. Thank you for having me. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of Cannabis. We are a division of Vienna-based Ring International Holding. I've been in the cannabis space for 3 years, and we're running a CBD operation in Europe. That is Austria, out of which we're catering to the European market, and we're running cannabis operations in Canada, catering to the Canadian rec market and the German medical market out of that facility.
Hello together, my name is FEIKE. I'm the founder of the WICO group. At first I would like to say thank you for having me on a tremendous panel here together with Alfredo, Matthias and Marcus. Thank you also for calling me an expert at something, because that's just cool. WICO is a company focused on medicinal cannabis, and we are operationally active currently in the United States of America, Denmark and Germany. And since the beginning of this year we expand our activities and invest currently in Switzerland and Greece.
Fantastic, thanks guys. So the first kind of topic that I think would be really interesting to dive into is the current actual opportunities to invest in European cannabis companies. I mean, the focus to date has often been on North Americans, especially in terms of publicly traded companies, but we've really seen the last few years, and I think the panelists can all attest to a lot of interest and opportunities now coming in for European players and European investors. Marcus, I guess starting from you, it would be great to kind of hear what your investment profile is, if there's any kind of specific type of cannabis company that you see as a really strong opportunity at the minute, or a specific area of the value chain, or...
I would say I'm general open, and maybe I mentioned that last year I did a large research about European cannabis startups, mainly in the German-speaking countries, Germany, Switzerland, and Austria. And a big private equity company, I think 7 largest in the world, was looking for opportunities in the cannabis space. It was very difficult for me to find the companies which suit to them, because most of the companies are too small. And for myself, I don't care about the size, but most investors are looking at companies who have already a certain turnover, best earnings, some positive numbers, and I think that's a bit difficult at the moment to find, because we are very early stage. I invested personally a couple of weeks ago in a tissue culture company out of Canada. They're doing mostly business in the US, and my idea is to bring them over to Europe, because it's a new technology, and tissue culturing, I think, is a very interesting field.
For sure. Does anyone else have any thoughts, any specific areas that you think are particularly interesting and worth people keeping an eye out for opportunities in?
To answering your first question as well, we try to have a balanced portfolio of liquid and non-liquid assets. So we've invested, for example, in Little Green Pharma, which is publicly listed, particularly in connection with the acquisition of the cannabis subsidiary in Denmark. Then we also have more like VC type of deals. We recently invested a meaningful amount in Urox Pharma here in Germany. And in terms of restrictions, I think it's important to mention, being a UK-regulated fund, we cannot invest in the recreational sector, so that's obviously a big limitation that we have. Other than that, we are open for opportunities, of course, but I would say that at this moment in 2021, when it comes to a producer company, whether it is a cultivator or something else, we like to see some revenues before even considering an opportunity.
Yeah, for sure, and I think revenues is something that we haven't always seen to date, but we are finally now seeing players coming in and really getting those revenues up. And Tim, are there any kind of investments you're currently raising for yourself, or any kind of opportunity that you've got in mind?
Yeah, I think our general investment approach is, when we look into the cannabis industry, everything we see here in Europe, currently in Germany, for example, as a new and emerging medicinal cannabis market, is not entirely new. If we just take a look into North America, we see that there are more than 50 jurisdictions basically that legalized medicinal cannabis in some shape or form in the past. So what RICO is doing, what we are doing, we are operating actively in those more mature markets like the United States. We are in our retail operations in the US, we are processing 16,000 patient contacts a month. And looking into those more new and emerging markets, we are investing preliminary in infrastructure. And then basically what we are doing is we collect a lot of data points in the United States and try to identify certain parallels or patterns. Basically what we then can assume will take place in a new and emerging market like Germany also at one point. When we identify a product or a concept that fits those requirements, we are focusing all our efforts on timing. To find out, are we too late with that concept? Are we maybe too early? Or are we maybe just exactly right? And when all those checkboxes basically check and we all come to the conclusion that it's worth it, then we incorporate spin-offs in, for example, in Germany or in Denmark, and will go to lead them really quick to revenue and also really quick to profitability.
Fantastic. And Matthias, you've spent quite a lot of time both in the North American and the European sector and got to know the investors there. Do you have any kind of advice for people or companies looking to exit to an MSO or to a Canadian licensed producer? How to kind of structure yourself for that position?
I wouldn't know whether I have any concrete advice. We're not the professional institutional investors. I mean, we have a 20-year history of investing into certain industries, grow kind of divisional players therein, and we have a tradition of always moving into businesses with our own funds, grow them to a certain stage, and only then reach out to the capital markets and seek for kind of accelerator investments. This has worked out fairly well and successfully for the group in the past. Admittedly, though, our past focus has been on more conservative and mature industries than cannabis is today. We've been in the cannabis space for 3 years. We've grown into a reasonable size and what we consider sustainable position in terms of operational and financial performance in our own funds. And right now we're just at a point where we're looking into the capital markets for potential accelerator investments. So we're looking on both sides of the ocean. In Europe, obviously, there's a lot of feedback that the uncertainty concerning the regulatory framework is a major red flag. There's no visibility as to the road forward, which is a key motivator for investors to pass on opportunities. As a quick fix to that, go to the US. But if you go into North America, what we sense is a lot of baggage from the first wave of cannabis investment, where a whole lot of cash was burned on early stage ventures that I think just tried to become big a little too fast and just overpaced. So there, one of the key challenges obviously is to convince investors of your business model being a solid one, your approach being a mature one, and a thoughtful one. I think that's the key challenges that we're facing today on either side of the ocean.
Great, and I think there's quite a lot of lessons to learn from North America. Alfredo, do you have any kind of thoughts on this?
Yeah, so you mentioned European companies being acquired by either Canadian producers or US MSOs. To my knowledge, we were involved in the largest transaction of a European company being sold to a Canadian LP a couple of years ago. That was the Nuvera-Afria deal. We were early investor there. And then more recently, MATTHIAS Life Sciences being acquired by Curaleaf. Again, we were early investors in MATTHIAS Life Sciences, and there was management crossover as well. And I think that goes. By the way, these two transactions combined were for a total of 1 billion, which for the European industry is quite meaningful. And I would say that signals the importance of having a good strategic investor early on that understands the industry, right? Because it's fine, obviously, if startups find, tech VCs investing in them, that is great for them, but these investors probably won't understand the industry the same way that a cannabis specialized investor would. And that may help down the road, for example, negotiating an exit opportunity with a large Canadian or US company, which was the case for us with Nuvera and MLK.
That's really interesting, and yeah, moving on to the types of kind of investors that are active in the market. Obviously, you're kind of now specialised on the cannabis sector, and now you've kind of transitioned from B to C. What would you say are the kind of advantages to going to cannabis specialists? In terms of raising, I mean, obviously the strategic support, but in terms of understanding the business model and things, do you see kind of clear advantages there? Yeah,
well, so one that I mentioned is understanding the possibilities for liquidity or exit opportunities, which may be being acquired by a North American company, or more recently we've all seen the London IPOs. For that, it certainly helps to have an investor that understands the industry, but not just in terms of an exit opportunity, but also in terms of growth, right? We've been in the industry in Europe since its inception practically, and part of our strategy as a fund is not simply to invest money, but also support our portfolio companies. The ecosystem is not so big in Europe, everyone knows each other, but it certainly helps to have an investor that is reputable and that will open doors with potential customers, suppliers, etc.
And moving on to kind of the institutional players, the investment banks and private equity funds, we've discussed a lot, and we've heard that kind of the current ticket sizes and market caps are still quite small to prevent people getting involved. Do any of you have any thoughts on what it would take with the kind of consolidation needed to actually make a private equity take a larger interest in this?
I have a short answer. I think it's basically that the industry itself needs to grow. I don't think a single company can do much. We are talking that the European industry this year, at the medical cannabis industry, at the retail level this year will be below 500 million euros. And yes, it is growing, but still, this is very small for large institutional investors. If you're trying to attract the largest VC funds, it's going to be challenging.
For sure. And in terms of maybe some of the cultural challenges from your parent company, I know that you've got quite deep experience in the traditional kind of investor field. Where do you think kind of attitudes are and the view on the kind of cannabis as an investment?
think everybody in the industry or in the financial industry is aligned that there's no doubt that cannabis is going to make its way at some point in Europe, in North America, pretty much all over the world. The question only is, and to institutional investors, is when.
Yeah.
And now when you're talking to the large cap institutional investors, they have, I don't know, a fund lifetime of 5 years, by and large. Obviously, the uncertainty of the timeline for the cannabis industry is something that doesn't play well with their financial models. And that, I think, is one of the key challenges we need to overcome before, like, the large cap investors of this world will jump onto that trend.
I completely agree with that, and also a history of over-promising and under-delivering doesn't help, right?
Yeah, and I also think kind of vast projections put in some decks as a reason to kind of back up that you're going to become big. We've kind of passed the days of that, so yeah. Do any of you kind of have any thoughts on what kind of the cultural differences are between North Americans and European companies? Do you sometimes see challenges speaking to investors or companies just because of the kind of disconnect there and the kind of lack of understanding?
I think there's a big problem in cultural differences because the thinking in North America is very different to the European thinking. Also, I think the cannabis market in Europe is different to the US market, and a lot of companies have come over in the past so that Europe is developing much faster, but they didn't thought about politics. And I think the legal frame is very important that we get faster to larger entities, to larger companies, and attracting more investors. And that's a bit of a problem because politics are very slow, and I think it will need time. But on the other hand, I expect more mergers, also acquisitions, so that larger companies will exist, and then you attract also investors. Because if you have 5 million euro turnover or 20 billion turnover, it's a big difference. And most of the investors start from 10 million up. And at the moment we have maybe a handful of companies over 10 million euro.
Exactly. And Tim, do you kind of have any thoughts on common struggles that investors are facing when they come into the industry?
Yeah, I think one major struggle every investor is facing who's entering the cannabis field for the first time is the regulatory challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Like cannabis is, for every investor with no experience with cannabis, it's a super high regulatory barrier. And regulatory and compliance has to have a constitutional basically acceptance and priority in those companies. I think that's one big struggle every new investor is facing. And when you look a little bit deeper, I think what's also a huge challenge for the industry is that the real cannabis culture, or the people who carry the real knowledge in the industry, basically come from a semi-legal industry. They work for over 20 years in a de facto illegal industry. So, and that basically made them develop values like loyalty, secrecy, and that is in total diametry in our eyes towards corporate culture, where it's about transparency, quality management. And I think that is a huge challenge that all of us are facing in the next 10 years, and we are convinced that the companies who can merge those cultures, basically, and that they will be the most successful operators in the field.
About that, I think at least things are improving, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned that very well in your recent report about investing in Europe, in the case of the UK, that the Financial Authority guideline finally clarified the pathway for companies to list in London and also for UK investors to invest in the European industry. So that was great, and it certainly boosted the investment space in the past year or so in Europe.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we here at Hanway, a lot of companies coming to us now and really eyeing the IPO and really kind of structuring their plans for the next few years based on the fact that they now can list on the LSE main exchange. And kind of diving into this, Alfredo, would you be able to give a bit of colour to the proceeds behind that and the kind of challenge that actually, you mentioned earlier that you're not unable to invest in recreational assets for companies with any recreational exposure?
Well, I'm certainly no UK lawyer, or no lawyer at all, but when we approach investment opportunities, we have this very clear limitation that we can't invest in recreational, even if that is federally legal in the country where the company operates. So let's say Canada, Uruguay, whatever. Some people think it's about the US federal illegality, but no, it has nothing to do with that. Even if federally legal in Germany tomorrow, we as a UK investor could invest there because the activity would be deemed illegal in the UK, and that is certainly a restriction that we have. The law is called Proceeds of Crime Act, is from 2002.
Yeah, this is definitely a key blocker that I've heard. A lot of people saying they're watching the recreation space, but they're unable to act. And strangely, well, I guess not really too strange, but I've also heard that a lot of CBD companies are being affected by this as well, particularly with non-foods being kind of a grey area in some parts of Europe.
But I also say that, some companies don't like that, for example, when we are negotiating with them and we tell them, okay, but if you were to operate in the recreational market, then we would need to exit the investment because we cannot have exposure to recreational. And they think, oh, that's a deal breaker. But I actually think that would be a very nice problem to have, right? That Germany legalizes, and then all of these companies that want to operate in the recreational sector would immediately have a higher valuation and plenty of exit opportunities. So, it is certainly a restriction that we have today, and a formal restriction, I would say, but it would be a very nice problem to have.
For sure. And maybe, Marcus, are there any other kind of restrictions or other issues that you see?
I think the problem is also that every country in Europe has a different law. And so it's very difficult for companies, to go into other countries. And I also realized that investors prefer their home country. So French investors mainly invest in France, German investor in Germany or German-speaking countries. And I think that should be a little more open, and I think the regulation should be similar in Europe, and hopefully we can get there.
For sure. Yeah, do you have any other thoughts, Alfredo?
He reminded me of something that I also see of companies that want to list in a stock exchange of their country, like a stock exchange patriotism, I would say. And maybe that doesn't make sense, right? Because we've seen that London has been very successful to date, at least with the IPOs. So even if you're a German company, it might make more sense to list in London than whatever German exchange. And maybe a double listing in Germany would be nice. But my advice is don't think that because you're operating in Denmark, a Danish exchange is the best way to go. Maybe, I'm not saying it is not, but not necessary, right?
Alfredo, I can add because I have a Danish client, and they now think about to list in Germany because Denmark or the Nordic countries are too small, and also stock exchanges are very small. But to go through IPO is a very difficult process. And I realized that maybe sometimes a shell transaction or kind of a spec deal is maybe the better idea. Because I spoke the last 6 months with 5 stock exchanges in Germany, and they are open, but the knowledge is very limited, and so you have to explain a lot that they are not afraid, to list various companies.
And we know there's a lot of retail investor demand in London. I don't think anyone can guarantee to me that there's a lot of retail investor demand in Germany for cannabis stocks. Maybe there is, but I still haven't seen it. So that's obviously a challenge.
Matthias, do you have any thoughts on this at all?
Yeah, I was just thinking when Marcus mentioned back deals and the like. We're in an extremely young industry. It's a buzzing industry, and we're just everybody's struggling to keep up with the pace that the industry is taking operationally. As a businessman and day-to-day business operator, my thinking actually is I shouldn't have to worry about complex listing structures to circumvent whatever burdens or hurdles we may have along the way. The industry is growing, the market is growing, people want the product. All that complication around it is kind of slowing us down a little bit, I have to admit. And that's why I wish that at some point we'll get to a level where access to capital is a little easier. Obviously, everybody, each side has to do something towards it. We as the industry, we have to become maybe a little bit more serious, a little bit more trustworthy, overcome past mistakes. And on the regulatory financial side, I'd seriously wish for a little bit more simplicity.
Yeah, 100%. And that ties into the kind of how to educate all of the kind of mainstream financial ecosystems, the stock exchanges, really about this, and hopefully we are going to be seeing that awareness come up over the next few years. Does anyone else have any other thoughts they'd like to add before we open up to some questions from the audience?
We knew you'd be ready. Here we go.
This should be directed at Alfredo regarding that EMAC and Curly transaction for the 286 million. Can you take a run at breaking down how they got to that valuation? And are there some number of like golden tokens that a company needs to amass in order to accelerate that value from, you know, more reasonable 50 to 60 mil valuation that I think we can all agree is probably the right price to that 286 price?
So the short answer is I cannot speak on the details of that transaction, but I would say that for us as an investor, our whole strategy was to create a package, I would say, for a North American company and give them something ready for them to develop here in Europe, which included a vertically integrated company from cultivation in Portugal to practically distribution in the UK, plus other assets in Germany, Switzerland, etc., etc. So I think the value comes not from the sum of the parts, but from the package that is being sold to a North American company. And the largest one in the US, that if that company were to create that in Europe, it would take them very long, and they will probably make many mistakes along the road with that. They are buying a package, and now it's their issue to develop it further.
Anyone else? Fantastic. Closing remarks?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for all your time today and all of your interest. It's been a great panel, I think, and really looking forward to hopefully meet some of you after and chatting through some of the key findings from our report, and also chatting to you about kind of the investments and what you're looking for. Fantastic.
Let's hear it again for those folks.